Um, so, uh, as Ralph mentioned, thanks for the introduction. My name is Lisa Schroeder. I'm a Watershed ambassador. I think Ralph touched on most of this array of logos I have up here, but so I'm a Watershed ambassador. We're an Americorps program, um, which is like a federal network of service programs. So our particular program, the Watershed Ambassadors, is like run out of the DEP and kind of funded by Americorps is kind of how that structure works. So typically what Watershed Ambassadors do is we do education. So still doing that, right? Typically we'd be doing stewardship projects where we get volunteers together and they do things like make rain barrels or clean up litter or something. And obviously right now that sort of stuff is pretty restricted. And third thing we typically do is collect data on water quality, which is also on hold right now. So right now we're doing a lot of the outreach and education virtually. So that's what we're here doing today. So I'll get right into it. I've mentioned Watershed a couple times. So watershed is a term that a lot of people maybe have heard, but if actually pressed on what it means, um, they're not too sure. So I always start pretty much all my presentations with, okay, I'm a watershed ambassador. What is a watershed? And it will also be relevant to understanding why rain barrels are an environmentally friendly solution to some problems. So a watershed, as evident from this picture, is an area of land, actually. When I do this presentation for young kids, I often get, is a watershed a shed with water in it? But it's not something man-made. It's not related to a building or anything like that. It's natural features. So as you can tell by this area, you know, it's kind of done by elevation, right? So the mountains here are kind of the border, and what a watershed is it's a drainage basin, basically. So when it rains or when it snows and then it melts, or when you wash your car in the driveway, that water goes somewhere and it eventually ends up in some body of water. And so all the land where the water that sheds off that land, that's where the word comes from, where it ends up in a body of water, that whole area of land is the watershed. So I'm assigned to a watershed area, management area for the Great Egg Harbor River. So I'll show a map there. So that's 15 down in the south. That's a lot of Atlantic County, eastern parts of Camden and Gloucester, like Upper Township and Cape May, and like a sliver of Cumberland. And that entire area of land, when it rains anywhere there, that'll eventually end up in the Great Egg Harbor River. So that whole area of land is the watershed for the Great Egg Harbor River. So that's the background on what a watershed is. We're going to want to keep the main thing in mind is the idea that water doesn't just sit where it lands, it travels over land, which means that anything that happens on land can end up in the water. Because when the water runs over the land, it can bring anything it touches into that river, into that stream, wherever it's going. So that is related to barrels. It is not a digression. The reason that talking about watersheds and water moving over land and all of that, why is that related to rain barrels? The answer is kind of two parts. So the first part is about stormwater management. So, well, I guess both parts are stormwater management. So the two parts are like the quantity of stormwater runoff and the quality of the water that enters our waterways. So thinking about runoff, as its name suggests, that's the water that like runs off of a surface, right? So when you have something called pervious areas, that's things like this picture here of like grass or forests, wetlands, an area like that where water is going to go through it. Contrasting with that is an impervious area. So that's something like a lot of urban areas, right? That's it, like roads, that's driveways, a lot of times that's sidewalks, it's roofs, swimming pools, like anything you wouldn't expect. You don't want water to go all the way through. So you would hope your swimming pool and your roof are impervious, right? So impervious areas are what we really have contributing to stormwater runoff, because that's where water is going to hit it and just run off of it immediately. It's not going to soak in, it's not going to get absorbed by any plants or anything. And that's when you can start having issues with flooding, when it gets overwhelmed, right? All this water is just sitting there or running off, it's running all into the roads and everything, because we don't have enough pervious area to soak up the amount of water that falls, because we've developed so much. I mean, everywhere really, but New Jersey is one of the more developed states, especially farther north. But when you have all this impervious area, that water's just running off. The pervious area that you do have gets overwhelmed, right? Like the soil can't indefinitely absorb water. If you think about like a sponge, right? If you put a sponge in like a giant bucket of water, it's not going to absorb all of it. So when you have a lot of impervious area, you have water running off of that, and you have the pervious area getting overwhelmed, and so that eventually becomes basically impervious as well. So you have all this water running off, and that contributes to flooding issues. It also contributes to, oh, forgot I had more examples. So we'll put that off. So it contributes to the quality issue as well. But I forgot, even though I just went through these slides, that I always like to point out that when people think about their downspouts, where your downspout goes determines whether you're contributing to pervious area or impervious area. So in the pervious area example, that water from the roof going through the gutter ends up in a little garden. So for the beginning of a rainstorm anyway, that area is going to be pervious. And that's ultimately our goal with a rain barrel, is it's going to collect some of the storm water. And a lot of the ways people use, rain barrel water is it ends up in a garden. So you end up directing this water into a pervious area. Usually you have to go out of your way to do that. Houses are typically, have the gutters going to, like the other example where it's just something going directly onto your driveway maybe. A lot of houses have connected downspouts, which you might think is like, oh, it's going into the ground, so that's pervious, right? But a lot of times it's actually going into a pipe that's, funneling the water under your yard and out into the street, where it then proceeds to flood the street. So one of the things that's useful with thinking about rain barrels is that we get those downspouts disconnected. So they're not just pouring onto your driveway, they're not just pouring onto the roads, it's being collected into this barrel. So the rain barrels help with that stormwater amount management element. So now I got to the second part. I jumped the gun earlier. So the second part with runoff is thinking back to the watersheds, right? Whenever water is running over the ground, it's going to pick up a lot of what it's encountering along the way. So when you have stormwater runoff, especially when you have like floodwaters where it's maybe high velocity or high volume, like lots of water pouring down the street or pouring down the sidewalk, it can pick up a lot. And everything it picks up, well then, in my case, thinking about the watershed, right, it all ends up in one area. It's going to end up in the Great Egg Harbor River. So all the litter that someone, they throw out of their car, or your trash can gets blown over or whatever, the water's picking all that up. Oil and gas on the street, it's picking that up. Sediment is a type of pollution people don't always think about, but when we have construction sites, all that loose soil can only absorb so much when there aren't roots to kind of make pathways through the soil and to actually absorb the water. So a lot of times, like construction areas, and whenever we have disturbed soil, a lot of that mud basically washes off and ends up in the river. When we have pets, animals, anything like that outside, if you don't clean up their waste, those sorts of things are ending up in the river from the water traveling over yards or sidewalks. When we use pesticides or fertilizers on a yard or a garden or a farm, a lot of times if it rains too soon after an application, or if you were using too much, so it was kind of just sitting there not being used, that ends up in the water too. So then we end up with, you know, the Great Egg Harbor River having all of this stuff in it because the stormwater is just running over all this stuff. And the more stormwater we have, the more runoff we have, the more we're going to have this non-point source pollution. That's what we call this sort of indirect, like it's just general pollution happening on the land, and it's only through it getting kind of washed over from this area, this whole area of land, that it ends up in the river. So this is like the water quality issue when we think about stormwater, is all the stuff that the stormwater picks up on the way. So rain barrels, by reducing the amount of stormwater that we're contributing every time it rains to just flooding the streets and pouring all over everyone's yards and washing off all the fertilizer and all the oil from the driveways and all that sort of thing, and we're holding back some of that water, it's not going to contribute to these big like runoff events that are going to take all this stuff with great force and volume into the river. Also, once you start thinking, depending on what you're doing with your rain barrel water, if you're watering a garden or you're watering your lawn or something, you're directing that water onto a pervious surface. So it's never going to wash over all these things and go directly into the river carrying all these pollutants to begin with. It's going to get soaked into the soil, it's going to get soaked into the plants, and the soil and plants have various properties that they can help clean the water, really. So if any of it does eventually get to the river, it's going to be a higher quality sort of water than if it was just running all over the streets. If it's been filtered through soil, that tends to be higher quality, and you're catching it pretty close to when it's falling, right? Like it's hitting your roof and the gutter and stuff, but it's not going over like your driveway and the road and all kinds of gross places, right? So you're capturing this water before it gets polluted, and then you're releasing it more slowly, a lot of times into a pervious surface that's going to be able to absorb it and treat it to some extent. So in that way, rain barrels are tackling this like twofold issue of runoff amount and runoff quality, depending on how you use the water. So thinking about the impact that a barrel can have, when used to its like maximum potential, it's estimated that a single rain barrel will capture about 1,400 gallons of water a year. So that's 1,400 gallons for one rain barrel of water that's being diverted from flooding, that's being diverted from carrying all kinds of non-point source pollution into the river. And if you're using the water in the rain barrel for some sort of purpose that you'd normally be running like your tap water, like if you'd normally just hook up your hose to like your well or whatever, you know, that's 1,400 gallons of water conservation that's happening too. Like all the water you use from a rain barrel is water that you're not having to draw from your well or draw from the city reservoir. So the last time I did a rain barrel workshop, we had 17 barrels we were going to make, so that's why I have that number here. I think the last time I had looked at the participant list, it was like 30-ish people, so like double that. So if everyone watching this does one rain barrel after this, then that could be removing almost 50,000 at that point gallons of water per year out of flood events, out of contributing to a lot of this like runoff pollution, and potentially of water conservation savings too, if you're using the water for something you would typically have been like running fresh water for. So rain barrels can be small, but they're like a pretty mighty difference, especially when they start adding up. So I think that, oh, okay. I forgot where I put the question slide after the use part. So I've mentioned a couple times if you use the rain barrel water. So some ideas for that, or if you're unsure what you can and can't use it for. Watering gardens tends to be like the #1 thing that comes to people's minds. A lot of times gardeners are some of the first like early adopters for rain barrels in a neighborhood. So watering gardens or your lawn. But even, you know, washing your dog or your car, washing anything that's not like food related, because this is untreated water, right? So you don't want to wash like your dishes with it, or like brush your teeth or something, but you know, mopping the floor, washing your car, something like that. If you have like a water main break issue, or you know, if you're on well water, and I'll say if there's a drought, but I guess you maybe wouldn't have rain barrel water in that case. But if there's some sort of issue, it can supplement like the toilet flushing water. Use it in bird baths, right? So there's various ways that you can use this water. Some of the caveats of you know, maintaining that water and making sure this barrel is as effective and useful as possible is that you don't want to have the water stored up for long periods of time. The way we construct them, and some tips I'll give you later, prevent mosquitoes from being much of a problem, but stagnant water is still going to be something that after a long time will be unpleasant. There will be algae and other things that can start to develop in stagnant water. So if you know, you don't want to have the water just sitting around indefinitely, because it can like start smelling. It can, if it has a lot of algae buildup in it, when you do want to use it, it can like clog up hoses, things like that. So when you do start harvesting rainwater, you don't want to have it sitting around for a long time, right? It kind of has an expiration date. And to maximize the amount of water, you know, per year that your rain barrel can collect, you'll want to think about having it pretty close to empty, if not empty, by the time the next rain is expected. Of course, when we have these periods of time where it's like rains for like 3 days in a row, like there's only so much you can do. But that's something you can keep in mind too. If you want to like maximize and get as close to that, you know, 1,400 gallon a year number that I mentioned, you'll want to think about not having your rain barrel already start at full before the next rain, right? You want to have that room to absorb the water. So some more caveats, right? Things you don't want to use it for. So like I said, you don't want to use it for cooking or drinking or anything related to that. It's, you know, it's untreated water. And you know, it's hit your roof, it's run through your gutter, it's sitting in a barrel that, depending on where you get them from, like may or may not be food safe. Sometimes the barrels come from like car washes or something, and so like it's not like it's like deadly toxins, but it was like soap. You know, like you don't you don't want to drink from your rain barrel. And something to point out is if you've used a moss killer on your roof, the water that you're collecting from your rain barrel typically is something that you're connecting to your gutter, so it's the water off your roof. You don't want to collect water that's going to have herbicides in it, because then that kind of defeats that point of it preventing like that polluted water from getting into the systems, because now you're going to end up just dumping polluted water into like your garden or something. So you want to be careful if you've used a moss killer, because it is an herbicide. It doesn't just kill moss. If you use it in your garden, if you use it on your lawn, you will be killing your lawn and garden. So it's generally recommended that you just don't use your rain barrel for 3 months. But certainly if you do, you don't want to use that water to water any plants, because it will kill them. So that's something to think about as well. For koi ponds, since koi can be kind of sensitive, and for vegetable gardens, since that water is being absorbed by food, basically, it is recommended that you get your rain barrel water tested every now and then to make sure you're not having something really awful that you're like, you know, your eggplants or whatever are absorbing now that you're going to eat. So I have a link there for a list of like water testing labs. I don't know what the status of those are right now. I know so many things are shut down, but water quality testing for like drinking water and stuff is probably high up on the priority list, so those things might still be open. So yeah, the official advice is if you're using it on like a vegetable garden, something where you're growing edible plants, you want to be a bit more careful, but I have heard unofficially, anecdotally, people use it on their vegetable gardens and it's fine. But you know, but the official advice has to be you want to be careful if you're using water even to be absorbed by edible plants. if it's outside, it's probably getting rained on anyway. But like I said, my official advice, my official stance has to be that you should get your rain barrel water tested if you're going to like eat plants that you're watering it with. But yeah, that's something to consider. Okay, so before we go on to the second part, that's more like how to build and how to get it installed, I wanted to pause for questions on the kind of background of the environmental impact of rain barrels. So if you've put any questions in the chat so far, we can take some of them now. If you have questions that you think are more connected to like a watershed or like stormwater runoff or like the environmental impact of rain barrels or how you can use a rain barrel, any of those sorts of questions, you can type them into the chat now, and I can take them now. If you end up thinking of them later, I can still take them later, but I figured I would pause for a moment before we kind of switched gears. So I don't see the chat. I think Ralph or Amy, is there any questions in the chat so far? No? Okay. So I can keep going. Like I said, if you think of something. Oh, okay. I always try to stall, give people.
Are the plastic barrels BPA free for organic veggie gardens or made out of other materials that are safe?
So that's so that's a good thing to think about as well. So if you're interested in, you know, making sure you're not ingesting BPAs or or organic gardening, that sort of thing, I guess you'd have to check wherever you're getting your barrels from. There's not a like standard rain barrel that, you know, that I know of. A lot of times when you go to workshops, they're kind of recycled barrels. Like I know the ACUA ones that we used, a lot of it was from car washes. So, you know, you'd have to talk to the source. You can get store-made ones, but like once again, there's not like a standard answer to that, I suppose, but that's a good thing to bring up, that if that's something you're concerned about, BPAs or any other sorts of additives or components in plastic, if that's something you want to watch out for, then that's something you want to watch out for, right? Because rain barrels do tend to be plastic. Sometimes kind of DIY ones, you can even use one of those like outdoor trash cans, but once again, like that's plastic too. So I would say it would just kind of depend on where you're getting your rain barrel from, and you'd have to find out on like a case-by-case basis for that one. But that's a good, I'm glad you brought that up, because that's something for everyone to maybe think about. Yeah, good question. And is that it?
Any others right now?
Okay. So as I said, I mean, if you think of something later, we're going to do Q&A at the end too. So if at any point you think of a question about anything relevant, you know, you can put it in the chat and we'll get to it. So, okay. So for actually making a rain barrel and getting it all set up, right? So the kind of practicality of it. So even before you make and install a rain barrel, you want to kind of prep the area. So you want to think about where you want to put it. As I said, people tend to connect them to a downspout because your roof is a decently sized impervious area on your property. So then you're kind of helping funnel some of that runoff from an impervious surface into the rain barrel. But I have seen like freestanding ones, and I have the last workshop, there was someone who was interested in doing a freestanding one because I think she maybe had a large property and her garden was kind of far away from the house. So it didn't make a whole lot of sense to gather up her water for her garden, like way far away from her garden. So I have seen like freestanding ones too, where it's pretty much just the rainwater that's raining directly into it that gets into it. But wherever you're putting it, you want that area to be level, because as the barrel fills up with water, if it's on an incline, it will tip over, which defeats all the point of like collecting the rainwater, right? So you want to have a level area so that it can safely fill up and stay there and stay standing up. You might want to think about creating a platform as well, because when you're draining water out of it, it helps to be able to have a little bit of that pressure of it, the water being able to go down. So if you have the rain barrel raised up a little bit, then when you connect a hose to it, you can have the water going down right a bit, and so have that like a water pressure, as opposed to hoping it just kind of trickles out level into your hose. So generally you want to put it on a platform so that when you're trying to drain it, it has some water pressure going for it. If you're connecting it to a gutter, then you will have to cut your downspout so that it, you know, like at rain barrel height, rain barrel plus platform height. Because then where the downspout ends, that's where you're going to put your barrel for that water coming out of the downspout, just go directly into the barrel. So you'll have to have the equipment to like cut your downspout. You want to think about reattaching your downspout, because the other thing I don't think we've mentioned yet, but rain barrels in New Jersey anyway are not a year-long solution, because you don't want water to get into them and then freeze, because water expands when it freezes, and so then you can like crack your barrel open, things like that. So you don't want your barrel to be sitting out from like November, December or so to March, like whenever there's a chance that it might freeze at some point. Generally you want to put the rain barrel away into your garage or something, your basement, and then you don't just want your downspout ending like 4 feet up. So you'll want to be able to reattach the downspout, or attach like one of those, like, I forget the word for it, but it was in the picture earlier when it was like kind of black flexible tubes that you want to have some kind of solution for the winter for water to drain somewhere, instead of dumping directly out of your downspout onto your foundation. So we'll get into the kind of anatomy of a rain barrel a little bit, but you'll have an overflow near the top, and you don't want that to just be an open hole, because then you are inviting mosquitoes in. If you attach a hose to it, you're much less likely that a mosquito is going to like fly into the hose and like bother weaving up the hose. It's very unlikely, as opposed to just an opening in it, you know, that's very inviting for mosquitoes. So you want to have a garden hose attached to the overflow, or something, to prevent the mosquitoes from getting in. But the hose also helps actually drain it out too, so it can be blocked, but not blocked up to the point where it's not going to actually be an overflow. So that's something to consider. On the subject of mosquitoes, that's obviously a big concern. Sometimes that's the fear. People are wary of rain barrels, and sometimes municipalities even, I think still, but certainly maybe a little bit before a lot of the education was getting out, there was like bans on rain barrels because people were so afraid of them being like mosquito magnets. Like, I don't want a barrel of stagnant water near my house. But as I said, like if you put that garden hose on the overflow, that helps. We put a screen over the top that keeps them out of the top. And if you're still concerned about it and you want to make absolutely sure that in case there's some kind of way that you'll have the mosquito that's perseverant enough to go through the hose or something, there is a product that's called like a mosquito dunk that has been shown to be pretty harmless to wildlife and plants and things. It seems to really just target mosquitoes. So if they get in there and like lay eggs, they won't survive. Another thing you can do is if you put vegetable oil in the water, I forget the exact ratio, but it's not much. I can look that up if people really want to know, or I'm sure it's available. But vegetable oil breaks the surface tension of the water. So typically mosquitoes can land on top of the water, but once there's oil mixed into the water, if they try to land, they'll like go into the water. And so they won't be able to like kind of stand on top of the water and lay their eggs. They'll like fall into it, and so they won't be able to lay eggs in the first place. So those are two things you can do. And obviously vegetable oil isn't going to like kill plants or something. So those are two solutions of things you can do to kind of treat the water to prevent it from being mosquito habitat. And even if you're trying to keep the water, you know, not sitting in it for long periods of time or anything like that, chances are if you have a barrel continually filling and holding water for like 8 months of the year, you're probably going to want to think about giving it a good scrub before you're like storing it in your basement or something. So you'll want to think about like cleaning solutions. Like how are you going to be able to maybe reach into the bottom of a barrel? So, you know, maybe a long brush, maybe like a clean like toilet scrub brush, kind of like that sort of tool can help, you know, reach the bottom and like all the edges and things of a barrel so that you don't have like gunk sitting in your garage for the winter. So these are all kind of besides the actual barrel to-do list. Oh, yeah. Thinking about the platform, you want to have the barrel on the platform before it fills up with water because you are not going to be able to pick up a rain barrel full of water and put it anywhere. A typical rain barrel holds like 50 to 55 gallons of water at a time, and that can weigh like over almost 500 pounds. So you want to make sure that the rain barrel is up on something strong, like cinder blocks, something like that, something strong that can hold that kind of weight, something level, remember, and you want to have it up there before it fills up. So that's another, besides the actual barrel, to-do list, background kind of to-do list. So I have some pictures here for the installation. You know, cutting your downspout is like a little bit of a commitment. So you know, the kind of traditional saying, measure twice, cut once definitely applies for cutting your downspout. It's obnoxious to cut it too low and then it actually doesn't go into the barrel, or to cut it way too high and so now it's like not funneling directly into the, you know, so you want to have an idea, like maybe not even do this part until you have the rain barrel and the platform and all that ready and up to kind of measure exactly how high it's going to be, where it's going to be, that sort of thing. Some other tips, you can have multiple rain barrels. When I mentioned the overflow hole that's going to be near the top, sometimes people connect that overflow to another rain barrel. So instead of just having a hose that's just loose going into their lawn or something, they put that hose directly into another rain barrel. So we have a picture here where the one rain barrel is connected to the downspout. So you can kind of see that they put in like another piece, like a kind of S-shaped piece to really direct it a bit away from the wall and into the center of their barrel. It looks like they have one where the barrel only had an opening in the middle, so that's something you'll definitely want to do if your barrel only has an opening in the middle. Typically what I would do at a workshop is the whole top is cut off and you cover it, the whole thing, with a screen, so it's not as important to have to put that extra piece on the end. But in the pictures you can see that they have the one connected to the downspout, and that's the one they'll fill up first, and as it gets to its overflow it pours into the second one, and as that one fills up it goes into the third one. And I think they have all three of them. It looks like they have like a pipe running underneath all three, so they can get that water from any of them. So that's something that sometimes people do. They have like a chain of rain barrels. I forgot to look up the statistic ahead of time, but sometimes people are like, oh, well, will I really fill up a rain barrel from, you know, just one storm? And the answer is absolutely. A rain barrel probably fills up in like a matter of minutes, honestly, from an average rooftop. I forget the exact numbers, but the amount of water coming off a rooftop is pretty stupendous. So definitely some people like chain link their rain barrels. Some people, the rain barrels typically are this like blue color for some reason, like no matter where you get them from. So something that people think about sometimes too is that they don't like that color, or it looks like trashy or something. So, I mean, if that's something you're concerned about, rain barrels are paintable. And so some of the resources I believe we have on the website, I'll double check and make sure it gets there if not. There's instructions out there for how to like kind of smooth down the plastic a bit and put like a primer on and then paint it with like, you know, outdoor sturdy paint that will handle the elements and things. So there's a lot of people out there who have like really lovely looking rain barrels besides kind of just like the blue color. So that's an option you can think about as well. And as I mentioned before, like November to March, that's when you're getting into like freeze risk. Not this year, I guess, but on a typical year, you know, we tend to maybe suddenly sometimes have like temperatures plunging. And so you don't want water to freeze in your barrel and crack it, especially if you painted it, put all that nice effort into it. Okay, so getting into the rain barrel itself. So this one here is, like I said, there's a screen on top. You can kind of see it flaring out from the sides here. The overflow is near the top because you don't want it, you know, like starting to overflow when it's like down here, right? So you want to put it near the top, but once you, this is, normally I'd have a rain barrel in front of you to like demonstrate, but you know, it's like barrel shaped, so it gets narrower at the top. So you don't want your overflow to be like not in like a straight part. You don't want it to be curving up and then you're trying to drill into it. And so you want it to be high up, but not so high up that it's like on the lid or something, right? Is what I'm getting at. And then you'll have your faucet near the bottom, because once again, it helps to maybe have some of the water pressure. And then also, if you have your faucet too high up, then it's never going to reach the water below the faucet, right? Like whatever water's above the faucet is the only faucet or the only water you're going to have access to. So you want your faucet to be as close to the bottom as you really can, while keeping in mind how close to the bottom can it still be for me to like use it. You will have it up on a platform, so that helps, so it's not just wedged in the ground or something. But and similarly, you might want to be careful about like not having it on a really curved part and maybe having the piece going at a weird angle. So that's something to consider as well. But those are pretty much the three main parts, and then it's the barrel. So in terms of the supplies, so typically if I were doing a rain barrel workshop, you'd have little kits made for you that includes all this. But if you maybe are doing some DIY, thinking about getting this stuff yourself, this is the supplies list. So the brass faucet was that part at the bottom, the faucet. The hose adapter is the overflow, so that's the part that goes near the top. So you can put the hose in to kind of funnel the water away and keep mosquitoes out. So the hose adapter is like a metal piece that you put in near the top. Lock nuts will go in the hose adapter and the faucet on the inside and, you know, keep them in place. Plumber's tape gets wrapped around. I'll some pictures of this too, in case this feels too abstract. But the plumber's tape gets wrapped around these two pieces to keep them more watertight. Caulking is the same deal. It helps keep it more watertight. You caulk around where you put in the faucet and the hose adapter. Gloves, of course, are recommended supplies because you're dealing with caulk, and so you don't want your hands to get stuck together or stuck to a barrel or stuck to whatever. And a lot of times these like hose adapters and the faucets, these things that have the like the threads that you screw in, the threads can be surprisingly really sharp. And so gloves, they're just good protection. And then I don't have this screen should be added on here. So just like window screening basically is what you put on top, and you use a bungee cord to wrap around the top, and that holds the screen in place. So I had screen to this list. I don't know. Oh wait, screen is on the list. This is later than I'm usually doing presentations. So screen is on the list, I just skipped it. All right, good. So yeah, screen with the bungee cord, those two pieces really go together. Depending if you're trying to obtain a barrel from the Upper Township opportunity or maybe ACUA, just depending on where you're trying to get it from, this is something to inquire into, whether you're going to have holes pre-drilled into it or not, because these supplies are like assuming that your barrel already has holes in it. If it doesn't have holes, then you'll also want like a power drill with the same size bit that your hose adapter and your brass faucet are going to be. So that's something that if you're getting a barrel, with this being virtual, you know, you're not being provided with all this stuff, but like, so if you're trying to obtain a barrel on your own, you want to find out if it already has holes in it. If it does, what size, like faucet and adapter should you be getting. So that's information, a little bit extra information that you have to get with us doing these sort of like drive-by barrel pickup things. Yes, so that's the supplies. So the steps. So this person here is not wearing gloves, so that is not recommended. But when you're putting it, you want to wrap the plumber's tape around the thread of the faucet here and the hose adapter here. It's recommended, you wrap at least 2 times to make sure it's really, tight on there and covering it. So that's one of the first parts you do, just kind of prepping your parts. So these directions, once again, are kind of assuming that the holes are already in there. So of course, if you're screwing the faucet and the overflow in, you'd have to already have the holes in. So you maybe had a step where you drilled a hole, or 2 holes rather, into the barrel. And if you are the one drilling holes into your barrel, for one thing, you also want goggles, because a lot of times pieces of plastic might, kind of spray out, and you don't want that in your eyes. Another thing to consider is that it's not, I don't recommend making a rain barrel outside because of, if you're drilling the holes, because of the little bits of plastic that are getting sprayed everywhere. We don't want to contribute microplastics, which is a whole nother problem. So like when I did the workshop at ACUA, we did it inside, so it was easier to sweep up the plastics and try to contain them as best we can. So I don't recommend, if you're going to be drilling a hole in a rain barrel, to do it without goggles, or outside. I don't recommend those things. But like I said, inquire, you might be getting a pre-drilled barrel depending on where you're getting a barrel from. So it might not be an issue. But once the holes are in, you want to, like I said, think about getting the faucet as low as you can, the overflow as high as you can. And if you're putting the holes in yourself, you also want to think about like the orientation. Like, do you want the overflow on the same side as your faucet? Do you want it on a different side? It might not matter that much to you, but in case it does, it's something you want to think about, right? And you want to think about which side is going to be facing your house, because obviously you don't want it overflowing onto your house or the faucet to be facing the wall, so you think about where your holes are going, if you're the one putting the holes in. Right, but once you have the holes in and you're screwing these pieces in, you want them to be like directly perpendicular. You don't want to put them in at an angle, which is why, like I said, I don't recommend putting it so low that it's the curved part, or so high that it's the curved part, because then it gets really hard to put it in right at that like 90-degree angle. So in this example, you can see they didn't do it like here. They did it upward, like pretty much the lowest you can do it while it's still straight up and down. So then you have the barrel on the side and you can just put it in straight up and down, and it's at the right angle. So the lock nuts, as I mentioned, those get screwed on the inside, which sometimes is the challenge. So if you have like long arms, I have seen some like tall, long-limbed people just like reach down into the bottom. I am not one of those people. So a lot of people have to kind of like go into them, basically. So yeah, some people like that can just reach the bottom. I am not that man. So yeah, that's probably more like me. So a lot of times you have to go into it. So this is a great chance to get like kids involved, something like that. But yeah, so the lock nuts for the faucet, that's really the hard one because it's down at the bottom. So that's the one you have to kind of dive into your barrel. So another caveat, I guess, is you also make sure your barrel's clean before you make it, because you're going to end up inside of it at some point probably. So yeah. So right, so you put the lock nut on the inside, and the caulking goes around the outside and the inside. So that's for the faucet at the bottom. That's another maybe while you're in the barrel job. Another like tips and tricks that I normally would be able to just kind of show you, but if you're going to be in the barrel and you're maybe someone like this where you have it laying flat and you're in it, if you notice she has it, or whoever, they have it arranged in a way where she's not like laying directly on her back and doing something like straight in front of her. I've done that before. And I mean, if you're wearing goggles, it should be fine, but like still you might have stuff like falling on your face if you do it that way. So I recommend, like, if you're putting the barrel like horizontal and you slash a younger like 8-year-old or something is going in, it does help to have it like laying so that they're on their side or they're laying on their stomachs or something, so that you don't have caulk or bits of plastic or something like falling into your face. So tips and tricks. So yes, caulking around inside and outside of both the hardware, the faucet, and the overflow. So the screen over top. So this is a really good picture of getting that kind of visual. So you would lay the screen over top. You don't want it to be trimmed like perfectly to the outside. You want it to go over the sides. And then you wrap a bungee cord around the top. I'm like trying to get my hand gestures in here. You wrap the bungee cord around the top, and that I'm like pointing with my hands. In this picture, you can see the bungee cord's like holding on to the screen, and it's going like several inches like down the side. So that keeps it secure, because you want the screen secure for mosquitoes, right? You don't want like a piece of it like really loose and inviting mosquitoes in. And the screen also keeps out like leaves and things like that can kind of muck up your, clog up your hoses and things. So the screen helps just keep everything but water out. And then you have a barrel. So any questions? Typically you'd be able to watch me do all that, and then you'd be doing it too. But alas, that's not what we're able to do right now. So if you have any questions now, if you haven't already, type them in the chat box. I'm giving you time now while I'm stalling and talking incessantly. Type your questions in the chat box now. And just, I didn't put my email at the end, but I meant to. I can give my contact information out. So if you have questions, you can follow up with me, or if you have Ralph or Amy's information, we'll get that information out as well. So
here's a question for you, Lisa.
Okay.
Can you attach a soaker hose to the water to water the garden? Can you attach the soaker hose to the faucet?
I suppose, I'm not sure if you'd attach a soaker hose to the faucet, or maybe you'd want to consider doing a hose adapter on both holes in that case, if you plan on having any kind of hose connected to the bottom. This is a good question. I have to say, I've like built them before, but I never actually took them to a house and like installed them. So yeah, I guess you'd consider maybe doing a hose adapter for that one. I'm not sure if the faucet's super conducive to having a hose attached to it. So I would recommend potentially trying to have two hose overflows.
So when we pick the parts for at ACUA, we get a faucet that will accept a hose adapter on the end, and the soaker hose is a good thing to put on the bottom if you're not going to be filling up watering cans to hand water. So that's
okay, so yeah, thanks, Amy. That's a great resource. So if you are getting maybe a kit from ACUA, it sounds like you're definitely good. But if you're going to be going out and getting your own equipment, it sounds like that's something you may want to specifically look for a faucet that has like, I guess like the threading on the inside is how they do that. So yeah, that's something that you'll want to be cognizant of when you're choosing your hardware, if you're the one doing that, is thinking about what you're going to use it for. So that's good sort of thinking ahead, right? You want to think about what you're going to use it for ahead of time to make sure it's designed correctly. So yeah, it sounds like the faucets can be. I would double check just to make sure it's not like a totally smooth sided on the inside one. But yeah. And for anyone who maybe is like, I guess a noob tuning into this, a soaker hose is this like pretty cool technology. Technically it's man-made, but it's like a hose that has like small holes along the side, and so you kind of lay it along like rows of plants, and it like gradually releases like kind of more in a low pressure way water all along the length of it instead of it all being concentrated as like a geyser at the end. So yeah, it's like a great tool for like irrigation. Yeah. I think I can go in the chat actually. I'm gonna put my contact information in the chat. So yeah, I'm gonna put my email address. If any of you went to any of my events before, you may have my business card. Yes.
It's actually on the webpage. I put the webpage.
Oh, okay. Okay, great.
That's the page where we're going to have the handouts and
yeah,
other things. And at the bottom of that is all your contact information on that page.
Great. Okay. Awesome. So, so you can either look on the chat now, or yeah, the Atlantic Cape May Hub, Sustainable Jersey hub. I'm just saying words. I'm sorry. The Atlantic Cape May Hub website, right, has some resources about like rain barrel facts and like I have sort of like a PDF file from Rutgers on installing your rain barrel. So in addition to this being recorded and posted later once we get that all processed, there's some like written down instructions and resources there too. So definitely check out that website. That should have been in your email that you got with the registration link as well. So yeah, thanks Ralph. I didn't realize that my contact information is there as well. So yeah, all my contact information is apparently there as well. So if you have questions later, you can reach out to me later through email as well. Okay, great.
So I just wanted to say real quick that, you know, thank you, Lisa, first of all, because this was really, really great. I know it's a challenge to do this kind of workshop that would normally be really hands-on. So, but I think you did a great job. And
thank you.
If people have any questions about the process, you know, please speak up. It's actually, you know, easier than you might think. Very much not handy, and I've built several rain barrels, and you know, so if I can do it, you can do it.
Yeah, for sure. I started my Watershed ambassador term a little bit late, so I actually like missed the rain barrel training, and I still managed, you know, I still pulled off a totally successful rain barrel workshop a couple months ago. You know, like I said, there were 17 barrels made all correctly, totally fine. So yeah, it's definitely something that you don't have to have some kind of engineering degree or anything in. It's decently intuitive, and when you have, you know, I included the pictures, and like I said, there's gonna be written instructions. Yeah. So and if you really need it, I'm sure there's other resources online and things too, or maybe someone's even made a video. I think there's a video in maybe production soon, so stay posted to the hub's website. I think there's a video that's like kind of in production right now that's going to be a video of someone making a rain barrel. So yeah, there's definitely other resources out there. As you know, sad as it is that you can't have that hands-on in-person resource, there's still definitely resources, so you don't need to let the pandemic cancel sustainability, right? We can still do our projects at home.
Okay, I think this has been really worthwhile.
Thank you.
And I think that'll be where we'll try to end it right now. It's a good timing, and I think we had a really good session. So appreciate all your help, and I appreciate you doing this for us, Lisa.
Yeah, I'm glad to be here.
Okay. Anything else, Amy?
No, I think that's great. You know, I hope this is the first of many, you know, many opportunities to learn together.
Okay. Thanks very much. It's good to see you all, and we'll catch you next time.
All right.
Bye.
Thank you.
Don't forget to do the survey.
Thanks, Lisa.